Hey, welcome in. Grand Rising, Grand Rising. Welcome to day 7 of Mindset Camp. I'm so proud of you because you have been staying diligent and showing up regularly and getting your mind right. Okay. So I appreciate your efforts. We are currently reading we're currently reading the Art of Not Giving AF. We're listening to the audio recording of it, about 20 minutes, 30 minutes of the recording every day. Also, I want to remind you, okay, waist trainer check. Okay, us ladies, wear your waist trainer a couple hours a day, few hours a day to start off, um, so that we can reshape what we're given instead of having to go under the knife. Okay, 1 second, let me grab my supplements on the other side of this table. All right. So remember, take your supplements. It's time to take your supplements. Spirulina chlorella is a this is a cyanobacteria in blue green algae, very closely related to sea moss. I started doing these before sea moss went crazy, and I stick with it because it works. So this gives you mental clarity. It helps you to focus. It helps people who have HSV and HPV. It helps you if you have cancer because it fights free radicals, which free radicals feed cancer cells. That's the extra oxygen atom that's floating around in the body. It will attach to cancer cells and feed it. So I took this a part of my 5 Steps to Freedom program, and this helped me with HPV, and I tested negative in only 6 to 8 weeks. So this is a part of my program. I have a link in the description if you need more info about that. We're going to be getting started with our recording in just a second. So we're going to take 6 of these in the morning. If you are not on the regular protocol, you can take all 6 at once, like I do. If you're on my protocol, take 3 in the morning and then take 3 after lunch. So we're going to get started with the audio recording right now. And then we're going to have a short discussion about what it is we learned and what we listened to. Because this is mindset work, and it's not always going to be easy to listen to some of the things that this guy is going to talk about. Some of this might trigger you because he might be talking about you. So if he's talking about you, it's okay. This is your opportunity to make yourself better, and in making yourself better, you will be less angry, less frustrated, have less anxiety, less control issues, and you'll be a more lighthearted and happier person. Because one thing I know about an angry biatch is that she don't want to be that. She wants to be a happier person. She wants to be calmer. She wish she had more control and could help things a little bit better and smooth things over for not just herself, but for everyone else around her. So let's work on that. So let's go ahead and pull up our book right now. And even if you missed the beginning or the other parts of the book, every section of this book is good. You can just pick it up and start reading it at any point. So we finished the last story. Now we're picking up on the next story in his book. Now, this book is a little bit more in your face. It is supposed to be. So, if you're somebody who is sensitive, just know that it's for your own good. Okay, it's for your own good. Sometimes it's okay to be offended sometimes because you need to be offended about some of the stuff that you're okay with. All right, now let's go.
5. You are always choosing. Imagine that somebody puts a gun to your head and tells you that you have to run 26.2 miles in under 5 hours, or else he'll kill you and your entire family. That would suck. Now imagine that you bought nice shoes and running gear, trained religiously for months, and completed your first marathon with all of your closest family and friends cheering you on at the finish line. That could potentially be one of the proudest moments of your life. Exact same 26.2 miles. Exact same person
Poor
running them.
Phil.
Exact same pain coursing through your exact same legs. But when you chose it freely and prepared for it, it was a glorious and important milestone in your life. When it was forced upon you against your will, it was one of the most terrifying and painful experiences of your life. Often the only
How many of y'all feel like I'm forcing y'all against y'all will to do the protocol? Just do the protocol, but do it on your own, okay? Don't feel pressure. Just do it. Let me press play now.
difference between a problem being painful or being powerful is a sense that we chose it and that we are responsible for it. If you're miserable in your current situation, chances are it's because you feel like some part of it is outside your control. That there's a problem you have no ability to solve, a problem that was somehow thrust upon you without your choosing. When we feel that we're choosing our problems, we feel empowered. When we feel that our problems are being forced upon us against our will, we feel victimized and miserable. The choice. William James had problems, really bad problems. Although born into a wealthy and prominent family, from birth, James suffered life-threatening health issues. An eye problem that left him temporarily blinded as a child, a terrible stomach condition that caused excessive vomiting and forced him to adopt an obscure and highly sensitive diet, trouble with his hearing, back spasms so bad that for days at a time he often couldn't sit or stand upright. Due to his health problems, James spent most of his time at home. He didn't have many friends, and he wasn't particularly good at school. Instead, he passed the days painting. That was the only thing he liked, and the only thing he felt particularly good at. Unfortunately, nobody else thought he was good at it. He grew to adulthood, nobody bought his work. And as the years dragged on, his father, a wealthy businessman, began ridiculing him for his laziness and his lack of talent. Meanwhile, his younger brother, Henry James, went on to become a world-renowned novelist. His sister, Alice James, made a good living as a writer as well. William was the family oddball, the black sheep. In a desperate attempt to salvage the young man's future, James's father used his business connections to get him admitted into Harvard Medical School. This last chance, his father told him. He screwed this up. There was no hope for him. But James never felt at home or at peace at Harvard. Medicine never appealed to him. He spent the whole time feeling like a fake and a fraud. After all, if he couldn't overcome his own problems, how could he ever hope to have the energy to help others with theirs? After touring a psychiatric facility one day, James mused in his diary that he felt he had more in common with the patients than with the doctors. A few years went by, and again, to his father's disapproval, James dropped out of medical school. But rather than deal with the brunt of his father's wrath, he decided to get away. He signed up to join an anthropological expedition to the Amazon rainforest. That was in the 1860s, so transcontinental travel was difficult and dangerous. If you ever played the computer game Oregon Trail when you were a kid, it was kind of like that, with the dysentery and drowning oxen and everything. Anyway, James made it all the way to the Amazon, where the real adventure was to begin. Surprisingly, his fragile health held up that whole way. But once he finally made it, on the first day of the expedition, he promptly contracted smallpox and nearly died in the jungle. Then his back spasms returned, painful to the point of making James unable to walk. By this time, he was emaciated and starved from the smallpox, immobilized by his bad back, and left alone in the middle of South America, the rest of the expedition having gone on without him. With no clear way to get home. A journey that would take months and likely kill him anyway. But somehow he eventually made it back to New England, where he was greeted by an even more disappointed father. By this time, the young man wasn't so young anymore. Nearly 30 years old, still unemployed, a failure at everything he had attempted, with a body that routinely betrayed him. He'd ever get better. Despite all the advantages and opportunities he'd been given in life, everything had fallen apart. The only constants in his life seemed to be suffering and disappointment. James fell into a deep depression and began making plans to take his own life. One night, while reading lectures by the philosopher Charles Peirce, James decided to conduct a little experiment. In his diary, he wrote that he would spend 1 year believing that he was 100% responsible for everything that occurred in his life, no matter what. During this period, he would do everything in his power to change his circumstances, no matter the likelihood of failure. If nothing improved in that year, then it would be apparent that he was truly powerless to the circumstances around him, that he would take his own life. Punchline? William James went on to become the father of American psychology. His work has been translated into a bazillion languages, and he's regarded as one of the most influential intellectuals and philosophers and psychologists of his generation. He would go on to teach at Harvard and would tour much of the United States and Europe giving lectures. He would marry and have 5 children, one of whom, Henry, would become a famous biographer and win a Pulitzer Prize. James would later refer to his little experiment as his rebirth, and would credit it with everything that he later accomplished in his life. There's a simple realization from which all personal improvement and growth emerges. This is the realization that we, individually, are responsible for everything in our lives, no matter the external circumstances. We don't always control what happens to us, but we always control how we interpret what happens to us, as well as how we respond. Whether we consciously recognize it or not, we are always responsible for our experiences. It's impossible not to be. Choosing to not consciously interpret events in our lives is still an interpretation of the events of our lives. Choosing to not respond to the events in our lives is still a response to the events in our lives. Even if you get run over by a clown car and pissed on by a busload of school children, it's still your responsibility to interpret the meaning of the event and choose a response. Whether we like it or not, we are always taking an active role in what's occurring to and within us. We are always interpreting the meaning of every moment and every occurrence. We are always choosing the values by which we live and the metrics by which we measure everything that happens to us. Often the same event can be good or bad, depending on the metric we choose to use. The point is, we are always choosing, whether we recognize it or not. Always. It comes back to how, in reality, there is no such thing as not giving a single fuck. It's impossible. We must all give a fuck about something. To not give a fuck about anything is still to give a fuck about something. The real question is, what are we choosing to give a fuck about? What values are we choosing to base our actions on? What metrics are we choosing to use to measure our life? And are those good choices, good values, and good metrics? The responsibility/fault fallacy. Years ago, when I was much younger and stupider, I wrote a blog post, and at the end of it, I said something like, "And as a great philosopher once said, with great power comes great responsibility." It sounded nice and authoritative. I couldn't remember who had said it, and my Google search had turned up nothing. But I stuck it in there anyway. It fit the post nicely. About 10 minutes later, the first comment came in. "I think the great philosopher you're referring to is Uncle Ben from the movie Spider-Man." As another great philosopher once said, "Dope. With great power comes great responsibility." The last words of Uncle Ben before a thief whom Peter Parker let get away murders him on a sidewalk full of people for absolutely no explicable reason. That great philosopher. Still, we've all heard the quote. It gets repeated a lot, usually ironically and after about 7 beers. It's one of those perfect quotes that sound really intelligent, and yet it's basically just telling you what you already know, even if you've never quite thought about the matter before. With great power comes great responsibility. It's true. There's a better version of this quote, a version that actually is profound, and all you have to do is switch the nouns around. With great responsibility comes great power. The more we choose to accept responsibility in our lives, the more power we will exercise over our lives. Accepting responsibility for our problems is thus the first step to solving them. I once knew a man who was convinced that the reason no woman would date him was because he was too short. He was educated, interesting, and good-looking. A good catch in principle. But he was absolutely convinced that women found him too short to date. And because he felt that he was too short, he didn't often go out and try to meet women. The few times he did, he would home in on the smallest behaviors from any woman he talked with that could possibly indicate he wasn't attractive enough for her, and then convince himself that she didn't like him, even if she really did. As you can imagine, his dating life sucked. What he didn't realize was that he had chosen the value that was hurting him, height. Women, he assumed, are attracted only to height. He was screwed no matter what he did. This choice of value is disempowering. It gave this man a really crappy problem. Not being tall enough in a world meant, in his view, for tall people. There are far better values that he could have adopted in his dating life. I want to date only women who like me for who I am. Might have been a nice place to start. A metric that assesses the values of honesty and acceptance. But he did not choose these values. He likely wasn't even aware that he was choosing his value, or could do so. Even though he didn't realize it, he was responsible for his own problems. Despite that responsibility, he went on complaining. But I don't have a choice, he would tell the bartender. There's nothing I can do. Women are superficial and vain and will never like me. Yes, it's every single woman's fault for not liking a self-pitying, shallow guy with shitty values. Obviously. A lot of people hesitate to take responsibility for their problems because they believe that to be responsible for your problems is to also be at fault for your problems. Responsibility and fault often appear together in our culture, but they're not the same thing. If I hit you with my car, I am both at fault and likely legally responsible to compensate you in some way. Even if hitting you with my car was an accident, I am still responsible. This is the way fault works in our society. If you fuck up, you're on the hook for making it right. And it should be that way. But there are also problems we aren't at fault for, yet we are still responsible for them. For example, if you woke up one day and there was a newborn baby on your doorstep, it would not be your fault that the baby had been put there, but the baby would now be your responsibility. You would have to choose what to do. Whatever you ended up choosing, keeping it, getting rid of it, ignoring it, feeding it to a pit bull, there would be problems associated with your choice, and you would be responsible for those as well. Judges don't get to choose their cases. The case goes to court, the judge assigned to it did not commit the crime, was not a witness to the crime, and was not affected by the crime. But he or she is still responsible for the crime. The judge must then choose the consequences. He or she must identify the metric against which the crime will be measured and make sure that the chosen metric is carried out. We're responsible for experiences that aren't our fault all the time. This is part of life. Here's one way to think about the distinction between the two concepts. Fault is past tense. Responsibility is present tense. Fault results from choices that have already been made. Responsibility results from the choices you're currently making every second of every day. You are choosing to read this. You are choosing to think about the concepts. You are choosing to accept or reject the concepts. It may be my fault that you think my ideas are lame, but you are responsible for coming to your own conclusions. It's not your fault that I chose to write this sentence, but you are still responsible for choosing to read it or not. There's a difference between blaming someone else for your situation and that person's actually being responsible for your situation. Nobody else is ever responsible for your situation but you. Many people may be to blame for your unhappiness, but nobody is ever responsible for your unhappiness but you. This is because you always get to choose how you see things, how you react to things, how you value things. You always get to choose the metric by which to measure your experiences. My first girlfriend dumped me in spectacular fashion. She was cheating on me with her teacher. It was awesome. And by awesome, I mean it felt like getting punched in the stomach about 253 times. To make things worse, when I confronted her about it, she promptly left me for him. 3 years together, down the toilet just like that. I was miserable for months afterward. I was to be expected. But I also held her responsible for my misery, which, take it from me, didn't get me very far. It just made the misery worse. See, I couldn't control her. No matter how many times I called her or screamed at her or begged her to take me back or made surprise visits to her place or did other creepy and irrational ex-boyfriend things, I could never control her emotions or her actions. Ultimately, while she was to blame for how I felt, she was never responsible for how I felt. I was. At some point, after enough tears and alcohol, my thinking began to shift. I began to understand that although she had done something horrible to me and she could be blamed for that, it was now my own responsibility to make myself happy again. She was never going to pop up and fix things for me. I had to fix them for myself. When I took that approach, a few things happened. First, I began to improve myself. I started exercising and spending more time with my friends whom I had been neglecting. I started deliberately meeting new people. I took a big study abroad trip and did some volunteer work. And slowly, I started to feel better. I still resented my ex for what she had done, but at least now I was taking responsibility for my own emotions. And by doing so, I was choosing better values. Values aimed at taking care of myself, learning to feel better about myself, rather than aimed at getting her to fix what she'd broken. By the way, this whole holding her responsible for my emotions thing is probably part of why she left in the first place. More on that in a couple chapters. Then, about a year later, something funny began to happen. As I looked back on our relationship, I started to notice problems I had never noticed before. Problems that I was to blame for and that I could have done something to solve. I realized that it was likely that I hadn't been a great boyfriend, and that people don't just magically cheat on somebody they've been with unless they are unhappy for some reason. I'm not saying that this excused what my ex did, not at all. But recognizing my mistakes helped me to realize that I perhaps hadn't been the innocent victim I'd believed myself to be. That I had a role to play in enabling the shitty relationship to continue for as long as it did. After all, people who date each other tend to have similar values. And if I dated someone with shitty values for that long, what did that say about me and my values? I learned the hard way that if the people in your relationships are selfish and doing hurtful things, it's likely you are too. You just don't realize it. In hindsight, I was able to look back and see warning signs of my ex-girlfriend's character, signs I had chosen to ignore or brush off when I was with her. That was my fault. I could look back and see that I hadn't exactly been the boyfriend of the year to her either. In fact, I had often been cold and arrogant toward her. Other times I took her for granted and blew her off and hurt her. These things were my fault too. Did my mistakes justify her mistake? No. But still, I took on the responsibility of never making those same mistakes again, and never overlooking the same signs again, to help guarantee that I will never suffer the same consequences again. I took on the responsibility of striving to make my future relationships with women that much better. I'm happy to report that I have. No more cheating girlfriends leaving me. No more 253 stomach punches. I took responsibility for my problems and improved upon them. I took responsibility for my role in that unhealthy relationship and improved upon it with later relationships. And you know what? My ex leaving me, while one of the most painful experiences I've ever had, was also one of the most important and influential experiences of my life. I credit it with inspiring a significant amount of personal growth. I learned more from that single problem than dozens of my successes combined. We all love to take responsibility for success and happiness. Hell, we often fight over who gets to be responsible for success and happiness. But taking responsibility for our problems is far more important, because that's where the real learning comes from. That's where the real life improvement comes from. To simply blame others is only to hurt yourself.
Whew. To blame others simply hurts you because the other people still have the power and you're waiting on them to release you. You're waiting on them to suddenly start acting right. You're like, just act right and make me happy again. It's not their responsibility. It is your responsibility to make yourself happy. There's a few things that I want to touch on right here. Okay. I love it when he said, with great responsibility comes great power. And I totally see that in my life. From me taking charge of my life and the direction that my life goes in, lots of responsibility. You have to be a responsible person to have 5 kids homeschooling, to run a successful business that is a professionally ran business. It takes a lot of responsibility to even run these Instagram and YouTube accounts. It takes a lot of responsibility to make all of this stuff work together. It takes a lot of responsibility to work with people personally. And that's something that can also be scary because you just don't know. You don't know how people are and how they will be. So it's responsibility and it's scary. It's responsibility and it's scary. But when you take responsibility for your life, for your actions, for your responses, then you gain power. The reason why you're so mean and so angry and so quick to pop off is because you don't feel like you have any power. You don't feel like you have any control. So then you have to express your power in a major way, in an angry way, in a larger than life way, making yourself big, elevating your voice to gain power. But you don't have to. The most powerful person actually don't have to get loud. They don't have to make a scene. They don't have to pop off at somebody. The most powerful person is able to hold their peace and to be the bigger person and to see the other person's perspective or see that you too have differing perspectives. Sometimes you're not able to see that person's perspective, but you can understand that you both have two different perspectives. And that right there, that brings power. That is how you gain power in your life. That's how you start to gain power and control over your life situations. Because the reason why you have anxiety and depression and you're a mean biatch is because you have a lack of power and control over your life. You're going to a job that you hate. You feel like you cannot leave that job. You feel like you're stuck there at that job. You're not stuck. Okay. You're not stuck where you live. You're not stuck in your life. I know you probably feel stuck. You feel like there's no way out, but there is a way out, and you actually have the idea in your head, which is your way out. You already know what your way out is because you sat there and you thought about your problem, but you don't believe in your way out. You don't believe that your way out is powerful enough to actually get you out, or you don't believe that you can live up to the things that you got to do to get out. You actually can, and it's just one step at a time. Sometimes we're looking for instant gratification, we're looking for an instant change, we're looking for somebody to come and save us, and we want it to be quick and immediate when it's not like that. It will feel quick in hindsight, but you got to put your foot forward. Wake up at a certain time every day. Set your morning routine. It really starts with a cold ass morning routine. If you could get your morning routine together, that sets the tone for the day. So that's why we're having mindset camp on the weekdays, Monday through Friday. This is a huge commitment to me. This is a huge responsibility for me to get up on time and go and make sure I take my bath and brush my teeth and get a little bit pretty for y'all, and for algae, my little boo, the algorithm, and to come here and to show up and to do this. Voice not all crusty. I've already done my morning meditation. I've already said my prayers for the day. So we're setting the tone so that we can be happier people. And being a happier person is recognizing the anger and the frustration and recognizing that you don't want to be an angry bitch no more. You don't want to do that no more. You want to preserve your energy because you're constantly giving out fucks all day. You're giving a fuck about everything that you don't even need to care about. You're so used to being riled up that you just care about everything. Anything gets you riled up. Everything can just get a response out of you. No, preserve your energy. Your energy is precious. You're only given a certain amount of energy in a day. Your energy is not unlimited. It's not expendable. You need your energy. So if you're only given a certain amount of energy in a day, then you need to pick and choose wisely where you put that energy, where it is that you're going to divert that energy. Your energy, you have an energetic budget. Okay. Now you need to know what your energetic budget is so that you can divvy it out correctly. Just like when you get paid, you got to slice that paycheck up correctly and make sure it goes everywhere it needs to go. If it falls short, then you fuck. Okay. Your energy budget is the same way. Okay. Once you have spent all of your energy, after that, it's like, oh, hell, just whatever. And we don't need that. We don't need that. We need to be in control of those things. So with great responsibility comes great power. So that means you need to take responsibility for where you are in your life right now. Okay. So true. Understanding does not equate to agreement, but it helps maintain peace. Yes. You don't even have to really, you don't have to understand what the other person is saying. You just need to understand that you don't understand. Okay. and that's okay. And we got differing opinions. We all do. We like different stuff. Okay. My client One Love, she likes parsley. She hates cilantro. She can't take cilantro. I think it's genetic too. I saw something that says it's genetic. I don't like parsley, but I love some cilantro. You put cilantro on almost anything, and I'm gonna eat it. Almost anything. Almost. I even put cilantro in my red beans. I love cilantro so much. So we all have different taste buds. We all got different opinions. We all got different, noise in our heads. But one thing we can do, we can correct some of the self-talk that we're doing. So let's make this plan for today, just today, only today. No negative self-talk. Okay. Don't call yourself fat. All right. I've been catching myself calling myself fat. Not even realize I'm just sitting there looking at a picture. I'm like, do I want to post this from Essence? I'm fat. I was bloated. My cycle was down for Essence. And I'm like, man, why I gotta be bloated for Essence? Okay. Why I gotta be bloated for Essence? But at the same time, I don't need to be talking about I'm fat because I'm not fat. Where in the hell am I fat at? Okay. And even if you are fat, it don't even matter if you're fat. It don't matter. What does that matter? You can do something about it. If you don't like it, you can change it. Okay. But there's some things about us that we can't do very much to change. Like this scar on my face. There's nothing I could do about that scar on my face. I hate that scar. But at the same time, my husband loves the scar. He thinks it's attractive. I don't even understand it. So we're all gonna like different things. We're gonna gravitate to different things. When we're in a conversation with somebody, we in the same